Hi guys, how are you? So nice to connect to you. Welcome to this video and welcome to my channel. My name is Laura. This is Pleiadian Healer from PleiadianHealer.com. So today we're going to talk about something that's been coming up more and more, and I feel people are just more interested in it, or people are experiencing this more and more. So I want to just make sure to make a separate video on it. And this video is going to cover entity possession, entity attachments, and entities, and how it all kind of comes into one, or what the differences are. So I don't even know where to begin. I hope there's not going to be too much interference. But basically, I have my little drawing here too, which I'm going to share at one point, my 1A drawing skills. So we have this one example with the Ouija board right here. And I shared this on my TikTok. So if you're on TikTok, you could follow me there too. I share just smaller snippets and everything. 28 girls hospitalized after fainting while playing with Ouija boards. Took me a while to figure out how to pronounce that, by the way. You spell it Ouija. I think it's a Creole word, if I'm not mistaken. I'm actually not even sure, but I think it comes from like the Caribbean. So I was like, how do you pronounce that? Ouija. And turns out it's Ouija. So a Ouija board is, for people who don't know, you have, usually it's a group of like 2 or 3 people. You basically have your fingers on something, like a wooden pointer thing or whatever. And then this board has certain initials on it or letters on it. You can make your own Ouija board even, or you can come up with your own concept of one. I used the example of when I was a teenager, I was with my sister and our friend. So we were 3 people all together. And we just had like a random wooden thing in the middle of the room, and then like candles around it, kind of like a seance in that sense. We were really young. I think we were 12, 13, or 14 years old. And so basically, when you just kind of have your fingers on it, like each person, it's supposed to move in a certain direction. So you start asking, the way we did is we actually asked yes or no questions, like, oh, is there a spirit or ghost in this room? And then it kind of goes to yes or no. We didn't necessarily ask for initials or letters, but I guess you can do that with the traditional Ouija board. So there are many different forms to it. And so this was in Colombia with this article. There was basically this incident where a whole bunch of high school teenagers, I believe they were around the ages of 15 to 17, they were hospitalized because of severe anxiety or something like that. So they fainted and everything. And though for me, this is pretty clear what happened. They just called in a whole bunch of random spirits without really knowing what they're doing. Not that you're supposed to do that anyhow, but it's just like teenagers are. They called in a whole bunch of spirits and probably got a whole bunch of entities attached to them. Maybe some even tried to enter, like entity possession in a form or another. And so this would be a perfect example of entity possession, entity attachments. But there are many different forms too. Okay, so let's just go back to the original image here. One of the most common forms would be what? Alcohol, right? Alcohol is the perfect example of how entities can enter another person with their consent in a form or another, because when you drink, you're kind of, I'm not saying calling that upon you or causing it yourself, but you are opening yourself up to that in a form of, you're already in an environment, because usually when people drink, they go to restaurants, bars, clubs, discos, whatever. They are already in this environment where a whole bunch of spirits are just kind of over them, above them, trying to latch onto a random person who seems like they can enter them. And then when you drink spirits, alcohol, even when you drink beer and wine, but more when you drink like vodka, spirits, whiskey, whatever, it happens more with the hard stuff, the hard liquor. So when you do that, that's why it's also called spirits in a form or another, right? But when you do that, it's the perfect example of an entity trying to take you over. So in my opinion, what I've seen, especially with people who are alcoholics, and you do have quite a few of those, believe it or not, But people who drink a lot of alcohol, who are kind of controlled by alcohol too, they have to have their fix every weekend, or they have to have a beer every day. People who are real alcoholics, they have entity possession. People who drink regularly, they usually have entities attached to them. So it's a mix of, with alcoholics, I usually see entity possession and entity attachments. They usually are just not the people, especially when they're drunk, but also when they're sober, they're just not the people that they used to be. And then with people who drink kind of regularly, but I wouldn't consider them alcoholics. But then again, what's an alcoholic, right? Like, maybe comment below if you have an opinion on that, because I think if the substance is controlling you, if the alcohol is controlling you, you can't go to a party without, or you can't do certain things without, it's like the anxious drinking, like, oh my gosh, I need to drink more confidence into me, so we're going to get alcohol. And I'm sure a lot of people have been there, including myself. I was young too at one point. I know the reasons I drank back then were many, but like, what's really an alcoholic? Like, if you can't function without it anymore, if you can't really go to social events without, or if it's just awkward, I think that's already a form of alcoholism. But some people might disagree with that. So anyhow, alcohol is one of the most common entity possession, entity attachment scenarios. And then, of course, you have drugs. So by drugs, I don't just mean party drugs, but especially with those, like when people take coke, heroin, all of that. But you also have other types of drugs. I actually have no idea. Like, I've never been in the drug scene, so I have no idea what's in at this point. I would say pot is a form of opening yourself up to entities, having entities being able to enter you and attach to you too. I know it might trigger a lot of people. I'm actually not sure if a lot of people who watch my channel smoke weed, but if it triggers you, there's probably a reason behind it. Because the new epidemic, I feel alcohol used to be an issue. It still is an issue, don't get me wrong, but I really do feel the new epidemic really is the weed. And they want to make people dependent upon it. That's why they're legalizing it everywhere. They're coming up with synthetic, I think it's called K2, which is synthetic weed, if I'm not mistaken. And so now you have all these homeless people here in New York smoking this synthetic stuff, not even like the real stuff or whatever. And you have these people sometimes smoking it on the trains and everything too. And basically, it's just this new epidemic of people not being able to function without it anymore. And I've actually lived with people back in the day, this is 10 plus years ago, where I would consider them couch potatoes, really, because they were smoking every single day after work. They were just watching their TV because they were completely high. And then they would go to bed and go to work the next day and just do the same cycle over and over again. And so I do see this as a real issue right now, especially in this country. I'm not too sure how it is in Europe. When I grew up in Europe, we used to smoke, like the people in my age group, people smoked as teenagers. And then at one point, when you're an adult, somehow, like when you're 20 years and above, people wouldn't necessarily do that anymore. But I've also heard it's changed a bit, especially because I grew up in Germany, for people who don't know, especially in Germany, I now have people my age dating others who are, it's similar to here, they're dependent upon smoking, smoking pot. And so I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's changed. Maybe it's kind of coming closer to what it is like here in the US. Because when I first moved here to New York, which was in 2010, I was shocked how it smelled like weed all over the streets of New York in certain areas, not all over, but definitely in the Greenwich Village area. And I was like, this is so strange. You wouldn't have that necessarily unless it's Amsterdam, but you wouldn't have that necessarily in cities in Europe. So I know a lot of things have changed. But that is another form of opening yourself up to it if you need it to function in your life, which I know a lot of people personally, or I used to know them, let's put it that way, who needed it because they were working in high stress situations. One of them was working in the film industry. The other one was a DJ or whatever. The other one I knew was like this chef in a 5-star restaurant. And I even found that a bit dangerous because this guy would basically get his hit in the morning before he went to his job, and he would basically be cutting up everything high, because he was basically cutting, he was behind the, like, he was a chef. And I was like, how can you even function high? Like, it was a bit insane to me how he would be able to do that without hurting himself. But at the same time, I guess he was just used to it after so many years. I personally know, because I know this guy, he lost his dad when he was really young. And so he was carrying a lot of trauma with him already. So I personally always feel people who are kind of drawn to those substances, no matter what it is, whether it's alcohol or drugs or anything else, they carry this inner trauma, and it's just a form of them coping with it. But you're not really coping with it when you're just kind of suppressing the emotions through another substance somehow, right? So anyhow, back to the topic. The hardcore drugs are certainly, you talk about crack, which we had this instance a few Christmases ago where I read this article. These two people on crack murdered someone or whatever. I mean, crack is definitely a form of entity possession, but not just the hardcore drugs, but also like pharmaceutical drugs. I see that for sure when I do sessions on clients, that they can cause a lot of damage, let's put it that way. And then of course the whats that they already put into the kids, and also the pets and everything too. So that's just the regular injections, not even necessarily of course, maybe also the one that we recently had. But I'm literally just talking about the random schedule that they get nowadays. So with that, you see a child that's perfectly normal one day, and then they get their routine visit, get whatever they need in their body, and all of a sudden this child turns into a whole new demon. And I've seen that plenty of times throughout my life, and also with pets too. I've seen it with my own pet, actually, because when I had picked her up first, she had already gotten her first round from the person who I picked her up from. And I was like, wow, that's going to take a lot of detoxing. So how can you see it in pets and kids? Well, if you turn on the flash function on your phone, even with the regular phones that we have nowadays, sometimes you might see like a red light or a golden light or like a bluish light in the eyes. And that's when you're recording or taking a picture. So some people like to explain it away with, oh, that's just because the pupils are too overextended and that's how you get that effect. But you see it, you can actually see the entities in their eyes in that way. And I've actually seen the entities in the eyes of my own pet and also other pets plenty of times. Like some pets had like this reddish tint to their eyes. Some have a golden tint, and then some have this bluish tint or whatever. And I'm pretty sure it's the same with humans too. I just haven't paid attention to it that much with humans. So you can, if you do like the regular flash function on any phone or camera, whatever you have, it's not going to happen all the time, but if you just kind of pay attention to it over time, you might catch it. So for me, that's just a perfect example of you can actually do see it in the physical life. It's just that people like to explain it away with other things. The same with me. I like to explain it away. I'm like, oh, that's not possible. Why would my pet have entities, all of that? And then I actually had to go in and remove 2 entities recently. So yeah, no, you can definitely see it in the physical realm for sure. So back to other ways that they can have it. So definitely with what we just mentioned, alcohol is probably the most common one, in my opinion. Is it possible through disease? I think some diseases can be a form of entity takeovers for sure. You're talking about the really bad diseases like cancer, all of that, but that might warrant even like a different video on it, because there's more that goes into it. There's more to how disease actually manifests, because disease has to manifest first in the non-physical realm to manifest in the physical realm. It doesn't happen out of nowhere. And so you need to go through a few layers first. You need to go through the astral layer, the emotional layer. A lot of that has to do with emotions and how we process emotions, until it finally hits, because a form of soul language is your language, your soul is communicating to you through diseases and illnesses. So the soul first starts doing it by little nudges, right? Like first something small happens, and like this emotion comes up, this anger comes up, and then it could eventually manifest as a physical illness or disease. So there's more that goes into it. If you're interested in a video on illnesses and diseases, let me know. I will try to get to one of those too. Another thing, the most common one in the New Age right now, and possibly also religion, because it definitely happens in religion too, is channeling. So sometimes when you watch these channelers on these New Age videos, you can see how an entity is actually taking over the channeler. The most common example would be, or the most obvious example would be when someone's channeling, let's just say the Arcturians or Pleiadians or whatever they're channeling, and they close their eyes and they're literally like, okay, now their voice is changing, their entire face is even changing. Sure, with some it could be acting, don't get me wrong, but I feel with a lot of these sincere channelers, they're calling upon these entities to take them over for that short moment, so their entire demeanor changes, even their entire energy changes, if you pay attention to that. A more profound way, and that is a form of entity takeover. So if you already want to call that entity possession, it is a form, the same that when you're drunk for one night, an entity is kind of taking over your body and then it kind of leaves the day after, right? So with channeling, it's the same. Even if it's just for 5 minutes long or 2 seconds long, that entity is trying to take over that body. And a more profound way of entity takeover or entity possession would be the walk-ins, because they are really looking for a vacant body. And when people, I mean, I know on my old channel, I had a few people who were interviewed, and one of these people was saying, oh, she's a walk-in. And I was really like, okay, so something took her over. Obviously, that's the only way you can really explain a walk-in. So it used to be in a few years ago. I'm not sure if people still call themselves walk-ins. If they do, what it probably means is an entity just took them over, and either their soul is kind of crushed up in the middle somehow still in their body, or their soul is completely somewhere else. So it really depends on the scenario and the case too. There was another thing that I had wanted to mention, but I just forgot about it, and it's not in my notes either. But basically, those would be the most common scenarios, in my opinion. I'm sure you can think of many others too. And so I just want to share real quick with you how an entity can kind of latch on to people, or what it looks like, okay? So let me just pop on this one screen with my notes again. Okay, so I already drew a random figure right here. So people who've been following me for a while, you know my drawing skills. So I drew this here. In German, we called it Strichmännchen. Actually don't know the English word for it. It's basically just drawing, you know, stick and bone or whatever. It's genderless, all right? So no arguments here. And it has a smiley face. So this is a random person who's going about their life, really happy, as you can tell, walking around. Maybe there's a flower they can pick. I don't know. This flower. My drawing skills are not really on point. I'm more of a painter, I noticed. So I don't really like to draw that much, but I like to paint more. So this is a flower, and let's draw some leaves. Could draw a rose too, but whatever. Okay, so now this random person maybe enters somewhere in the world where there's some dense energy, you know, like an entity infested room. For example, a restaurant or bar where people drink constantly and call upon those spirits constantly would be a perfect example. Or they just go into a dark place somehow, you know, plenty of those all throughout the world, but somehow they attract an entity towards them. And I'm going to draw this entity as a shadow or a cloud, because that's usually how I see them. Okay, so it's like this blanket square-like thing. Which, by the way, so I kind of teach how you can see your own entities in my course, How to Be Your Own Shaman, and how you basically get your own insight on how you see that. Some people won't see them. Some people just will know, you know, like a clear cognizance that it's there, or clairsentience. But some people will actually see them, clairvoyance and everything. So I kind of teach that in my course, How to Be Your Own Shaman too, How to Be Your Own Healer. But basically the way I see it, especially in sessions and the shamanic healing sessions, when the entity is inside a person's body, it's usually a shadow-like thing, like a blob almost. When it's attached to them, it can have various different shapes. So sometimes I see it as spiders, octopuses, and those people who've taken a session with me, you know that, of course. But there could be random other things. You know, there could be anchors, there could be arrows, and it's not always an entity. Sometimes it's an intrusion or implant. but with an entity, it takes various different shapes. Just for the simplicity of it all, we're going to say this is a random entity and it's kind of just attaching. So the arrow is right here, kind of attaches maybe to the neck area or the heart. Okay. So then it's kind of like there. Okay. So it kind of moved there. It's kind of on that person in the energetic realm. Now, how could a person notice this entity attachment in the physical realm? All of a sudden the neck is hurting, or the person has migraines, or it's just not the same. The person, I'm going to say the person's a he doesn't feel the same. Okay. He or she just kind of feels out of it. It kind of feels like something's there, or it's kind of causing pressure. And it's not always the case, but super sensitive people might feel that. Okay. Especially when there's migraines or whatever coming in, but it doesn't, migraines aren't always an entity attachment. It can also be caused by a lot of AI. They have their frequencies that they can use to cause it to. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but something might be felt in the physical realm, is my point. And so this entity is attached there, and you want to make sure that you get rid of that, by the way. But the more entities attached, so let's just say that was one entity randomly, but let's just say this person gets older, goes to more of these places like restaurants or just ghost infested towns, whatever. All of a sudden, this person has like 1, 2, 3 entities or 4 entities, right? So the entire energy field of this person changes. I can definitely feel it when there's a person coming in, and I hate to say this, but usually is after these people have received the whats or whatever. But a person comes in, it's not always that, but lately, especially the past 2 years, it kind of has been a lot of that, so it's usually attacks. So somehow this person has changed. And when you are a targeted individual and you kind of clear your energy all the time, I clear my energy every single day, honestly. It's so important nowadays. I started that routine back in 2017 already. And in hindsight, of course, you always wish you had already started earlier. But I'm glad I've been doing this for the past 6 years already, because people can feel that. When I go to other people who are in the same field, or even other psychics, whatever, I remember like in 2019, like 2 years after that, this one person, she's like, yeah, she can feel that I clean myself like all the time, because energetically it makes a huge difference. So cleansing your energy field, if you can't do it every day, try to do it as much as you can, like 3, 4, 5 times a week. It makes a huge difference. So this person who has no awareness of energy or auric fields or whatever, which a lot of people in the world are like that, he's infested with entities. And so these entities are gonna basically steer his life in certain situations, right? So they're gonna steer him, let's just say this person gets drunk or whatever, they're gonna steer him towards another person so that he can sleep with that person or have a one-night stand, whatever, kind of like really F up their life in a form or another. Not that having a one-night stand F's up your life, but it's more like they're writing off his energy, misusing his sexual energy for certain acts like that, which is basically what it is, like making love and having a one-night stand are 2 completely different things, but basically just steering his life in a form like that. And that's usually in this bar-like setting. Another would be, and that happened to me a lot, especially 2 years ago when the agenda first rolled out, where I was just randomly sitting on a train, minding my own business, and people would just randomly attack me for no reason. This had nothing to do with wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, by the way, but they would like literally just feel so triggered in my presence. They would find any reason they could to attack me. And so I would have like the hardest time just finding my little niche and corner. I would have to build up strong protection around me to get that away. But basically just entities are just going to randomly attack others through him. And it's just another fun ride for them, another carousel in that form. So that already happens with entity attachments, okay? And in the worst case scenario, they can kind of steer your life in a direction, like they can try to make decisions for you. where you think it's your own idea somehow, but those are like bad decisions in hindsight. We're like, well, how the heck did I even think this was a good idea? You know, when you're drunk, you make this decision and it was like the worst idea ever, kind of like that, but when you're sober, if that makes sense. So I'm sure you can think of examples in your life. You know, I can think of a few in my life actually, and that was 10, 15 years ago for sure. So basically that is entity attachment. Now, entity possession is a bit different, is a bit more extreme. So once again, we have our blob or cloud right here. Okay, so we're going to call one A and the other one P for possession, just to make it easier. That's supposed to be a P. Okay, let's do it like that. It's gonna get a bit noisy in the background now, it seems. Okay, so P is possession. So when I see that, usually, is that this thing here, somehow they always enter through the mouth, usually. I don't know why. And I pull them out through the mouth too. So they kind of just enter. It's kind of like a bad horror movie. So they're kind of like, I can't draw when I'm like looking at the screen. So they're kind of like in this person now, okay? And people can have entity attachments and entity possessions at the same time. Absolutely possible. Everything's possible in today's world. But basically with possession, now you have this inside of you, and your initial soul, or whatever you want to call it, you know, your own spark inside of you, that can coexist with this entity. In the most extreme case, which is a walk-in case, in my opinion, the entity is going to try to push that spark out, and so that your spark is not even in your body anymore. And that's when people are completely vacant. But it's absolutely doable for this entity to kind of push the spark. What should we do the spark? The spark can be like a spark, right? Like kind of like a star, maybe. I don't know. So this is a star. So your star or spark is still in your body somehow. And I should have brought like acrylic. So like golden acrylic. No, I'm just kidding. Golden colors. Your spark is still in your body, and the entity is in your body too. And this is especially when you drink alcohol to such a degree, you're almost blacking out, right? Which I'm sure a lot of us have been there. And the blackout process, I would say, is the most extreme example of an entity takeover, like entity possession. So your spark's still somewhere in that body, because once you're sober again, wow, boom, where it kind of floats above your body somehow. It's still a bit of a mystery to me how it coexists. I have seen it coexisting with an entity in the body still, which is a bit strange. But sometimes it completely floats out. It kind of like is still connected somehow above. But basically, the possession is here, the entity is here, and it does whatever. You know, this is really when people go bananas. They murder their wives when they're drunk or on drugs or whatever. They have these car accidents, whatever it is. You know, the whatever you read in the news, that's basically what it is. That's an entity possession, entity takeover. Let's not go into the school shooting things. That's a different, something else. Okay, that's a lot of something else. But anyhow, it gives you an idea of the evilness that really exists. A lot of times is entity possession. Okay. And so you come back to your senses the next day because you come off of your high, you're sober again, whatever substance you took. And you're like, oh, how the heck did I think this was a good idea? How the heck did I think sleeping with this person or murdering this person or whatever was a great idea? You know, or it could be something entirely different even. Maybe nothing severe happened. Maybe you just passed out and you made it home somehow, or you made it to a safe space, whatever happened though, the entity was still took over your body, and that's the scary part. So with entity possession, especially with these channelers, over time, it's not hard to kind of see the more they channel and let these entities enter their bodies, the longer these entities are going to stay in their bodies until they don't want to leave anymore. And that's why you get more and more vacant eyes when you see people who've been doing it for a while. You know, when you see people who've been doing it for 10, 20 years, whatever, you get that vacant eye stare, and they're probably completely different people outside of the camera too, all of those things. So there's a lot that goes into it. And in short, I think this kind of summarizes entities, entity attachments, entity possessions. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to discuss. So I usually see them as shadows entering through the mouth. Can you get rid of them? Yeah. So in the example of my pet, for example, that had to do with someone calling upon them, and actually is a form of witchcraft, which I want to talk about in a different video too. But whether or not this person had done it consciously or not doesn't even matter. This person had kind of put these two entities in her. My pet's a female. And I saw it as a black shadow and a white shadow. And the way that it played out, or the way that you might also see it play out in your pets and your children, by the way, is whenever you have something important going on, like you need to record a video, or you need it just to be quiet, right? Or you just need some, whatever, the distractions come rolling in. You know, all of a sudden they're throwing tantrums, they're acting like the worst kids or pets out there. I had this one case, and this is already a little while ago, a few months ago, where my friend came over and we were trying to do something really important because it was the only day I was off and it was the only day she was off. We could kind of make our schedules match. And I put my dog in the room right next to us. I was like, okay, everything's going to be fine. She's usually good. At least when I'm home alone, she understands, you know, she's okay. It was the hardest time to get a piece of silence, to get any type of silence. And at first I was like, oh, maybe it's just because she's not used to another person, like us kind of doing our thing. Or maybe it's because she's just overly social with it. But no, it turns out it's probably these entities that were in her that were trying to distract us from everything. And we only had like a few hours of time. So time was really an issue on that day too. But yeah, it turns out that's how entities can kind of work. And so that was like a less severe case of it, but it was still like, okay, it makes you think about what are all the times in your life where maybe they were trying to really mess with your life or F up your life in a form or another, right? It starts with the smaller things where you can barely catch a breather or catch any type of silence or peace, but it kind of extends into more things, which I'm sure you can think of at least a few times in your life. So I know this is not the best drawing, but people are aware of my drawing skills, I think, at this point. And I hope that kind of makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, until then, have a wonderful one. Talk to you very soon again. Bye, guys.